It appears to show a man wearing a helmet beside a saucer-like shape in the air. Below the airborne object, an intriguing swirl.
This has been interpreted straightforwardly as a depiction of a UFO encounter. People and animals fleeing the scene with an object in the sky. What hasn't been picked up on historically is the fact that beneath this object there are concentric rings depicted on the ground. These have been entirely overlooked by researchers until now.
While ancient Australians may have painted crop circles on rocks, another people may have captured them in stone. Mysterious rings of fantastically eroded stones called sarsens are found throughout the British Isles. Is there a link between the circles of stone and the circles of wheat?
There is good evidence that a number of historical monuments, such as Stonehenge, do have direct connections with the crop circle phenomenon, and indeed it has been speculated that the stone circles are constructed purely by placing stones around the perimeter of crop circles. And in fact, if you analyse the geometry of the stone circles, you find that they're not actually circular. They deviate from circularity. They're egg-shaped or they're slightly elliptical, irregular. If you take accurate measurements of crop circles, you find exactly the same types of deviation. And the location and the dimension and the shape of crop circles does correspond closely with stone circles.
For now, the connection remains pure speculation. Ancient architects of Stonehenge and other mysterious circles left no writings. Historians are not even sure how they were built, much less why they appear to mimic crop circles. The first possible written record comes from the year 1678. It's known as the Mowing Devil. Strange news out of Hertfordshire, the old chronicle begins. A farmer has a dispute with a mower. The worker is asking too high a price to mow the farmer's field. Negotiations are cut off with a curse. Then let the devil mow it, the farmer declares. That night, diabolical things seem to be afoot. Strange lights and unnatural sounds are said to emanate from the field. The next morning, an oval section of the crop is pressed down neatly in the grain. It appeared that the devil had overheard the farmer's bravado and was up to the challenge, which is how it was depicted, Satan with a scythe mowing down the crop. But a closer look at the details suggests another possibility.
There is no mention that it was cut, although the devil is wearing a scythe, and we're looking at the picture thinking it must have been cut. There is actually no mention that the straws were cut. So the chances are it was a perfect crop circle.
In actual fact, the text of the document and the illustration, they show the crop to be laid very neatly. All the stems are parallel. In fact, it says in the text that the crop was laid with extraordinary neatness. There's every indication that this is a classic crop circle. It's the kind of illustration, the kind of account you might give if you were to see a crop circle never having known of the phenomenon before.
After The Mowing Devil was published, the history of crop circles seems to go underground. Over the next 200 years, there are only a handful of scattered, murky reports. Were people afraid to speak of crop circles lest they disturb the dark forces behind them? Or, as modern skeptics claim, was there simply nothing to talk about? With the 20th century came the proliferation of air travel. Flyers were struck by the quilted look of the farmlands. Amid the lush squares, however, were a few inexplicable circles. The secret of the countryside is no longer hidden. From the air, crop circles are fully exposed. As we continue, crop circles go under the microscope, and for the first time, scientists speak out on the subject.
The plants show, 4 or 5 very clear anomalies that we can't explain,
Wiltshire County, England is befogged and bedeviled by mystery. Here lies Avebury Circle, a 5,000-year-old enigma in stone. Nearby, the largest monument in prehistoric Europe, the pyramid called Silbury Hill. Strange white horses are carved into the surrounding chalk hills. Then there's the ultimate wonder of ancient Britain, Stonehenge. Yet in the 1980s, still another mystery materializes. Travelers throughout the area report odd circular depressions in the fields. One early visitor is an electrical engineer and government official named Colin Andrews.
What impressed me immediately was that the only track into the large circle was my own. I could not find any damage whatsoever, any signs that human beings had been involved.
They are simple circles, nothing like the elaborate pictograms of later years. But Andrews is so intrigued that he co-authors a book with Pat Delgado named Circular Evidence. The slim volume becomes a surprise bestseller.
Within just weeks of the release of the book in 1989, everybody in every pub was talking about what these extraordinary circles were, and this country was alight with the talk into aliens or all kinds of theories that were being put forward as something was visiting the fields of southern England, and in a greater way we were beginning to get feedback from abroad that this was not just southern England.
There is even a touch of panic in high places. The British military is alarmed that unidentified craft might be patrolling their airspace. The National English Farmers Unit posts a reward of £1,000 for information leading to the prosecution of anyone damaging their crops. The call for the first official investigation comes from Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. It goes out to Colin Andrews, who devotes the next 10 years to a study of the phenomenon.
There is something, I think, fascinating and extremely important occurring here, and science must soon begin to understand what it is that causes them.
A scientific investigation is already underway. Researchers are taking samples of grain from crop circles and shipping them back for analysis to a lab run by American biophysicist Paul Levengood. What Levengood finds opens a lot of eyes.
Once he examined those original samples and found a number of anomalies, one of which was completely missing seeds. There were no seeds in the seed head. We have sampled something like 400, maybe 450 formations in 8 different countries. And in fact, these early anomalies, the bulk of them have been replicated over and over and over again. The plants show 4 or 5 very clear anomalies that we can't explain.
One of the more telling deformities shows up at tiny joints in the stems called nodes. In samples taken from some crop circles, the nodes are blown out. They have been exploded from within, not unlike what happens to living tissue in a microwave oven, which is close to what may be happening.
Levengood suspected that a heating agent, and we suspect it is microwaves, was in fact interacting with the moisture inside the plant stems.
So the plants have been zapped, but by what? Some believe that it is alien spacecraft burning circles into the grain with blasts of microwave energy. In fact, there is anecdotal evidence to support this. Crop circles often appear in conjunction with UFO sightings. The strange moving lights called glow balls captured in these photographs are often seen in the vicinity of crop formations. Researchers have found that 1/3 of all crop circles can be linked to UFO reports. Levengood's team thinks the answer might be more down to earth, but hardly less exotic. Crop circles, they feel, are the result of poorly understood forces called plasmas.
Plasmas are simply masses of electrified air particles. A common example of a plasma discharge is a lightning strike. Another one would be the aurora borealis. And the findings in the plants and the soils all indicate the presence of strong magnetic fields, electrical pulses, and some sort of heating, probably microwave radiation.
By 1990, another theory has gained widespread acceptance. A physicist named Terence Meaden suggests that crop circles are created by the weather. In Meaden's theory, a vortex, like a small tornado, descends to the ground. As it evaporates, a circular depression is left on the field, in a distinct swirling pattern etched by spiraling winds. Finally, here is an idea that makes some sense and satisfies people who won't accept a supernatural explanation. For a time, particularly among scientists, the vortex theory of crop circles prevails. Then something happens. Crop circles suddenly become more than, well, circles. Some formations now have straight lines connecting the circles, creating so-called dumbbell patterns. Then the first of the pictograms, or elaborate designs, begin to appear, and the weather vortex theory no longer makes as much sense. A vortex could conceivably make a simple circle, but this?
Nature prefers design and produces design everywhere, but some of these designs do stretch that imagination.
Some find the new patterns mesmerizing, but a lot of skeptical eyebrows are raised. Are these patterns that would be found in nature?
In 1990, when suddenly two circles were connected by a straight line, everything changed after that day in May 1990. And I do believe that that was the day the first artists or the first hoaxers entered the fields and began to contaminate the scene.
As we continue, crop circles are credited with everything from elevating your mood to short-circuiting your cell phone to something called the Viagra effect.
Personally, I've experienced things that defy logic, defy what I've ever learned about how we interact with our environment.
In the early 1990s, crop circles add a startling twist. The once simple designs go psychedelic, assuming the shapes of Celtic crosses, adopting the so-called sacred geometry of 5 balanced shapes, suggesting spiral galaxies, phases of the moon, astrological signs, magic symbols, and unknown alphabets. Each year, the formations become more complex. It is as if a higher intelligence is trying to get our attention. Some people take them literally, believing that, in fact, a great circle maker is initiating us into deeper and deeper mysteries.
It's superior, intelligent human beings in the past had knowledge that we've lost. And it's set in the landscape.
I've realized that there is some sort of a higher intelligence. There definitely is something that is behind this and guiding not only the formations that appear, but also, I think, quite possibly the people who are making them. And it's interacting with us all.
Whoever or whatever is making the circles, there's a captive audience. Each summer brings more and more researchers and devotees to the circles. They are called cruppies, and they come from all over the world. Remote wheat fields become international hotspots.
It almost was becoming hysterical, and people were flocking down to the formations and visiting them.
Among farmers, though, there's another name for the crappies: trespassers.
The intrusion on private land, I don't think people would like it in their own private gardens. If I went and pulled some flowers up and trampled them down and just walked in, I don't think people would like that. And to be quite honest, no different. We own this, and it's our private property. And I think we're pretty well fed up with it.
Unable to keep out the uninvited visitors, some farmers reach a compromise. They put up donation boxes at the entrance to their fields. The proceeds more or less pay for the damage to the grain. In England, circle mania blossoms into a full-blown scene. A centuries-old canal pub in Wiltshire becomes the place to be. The back room of the barge is given over to crappie art and postings of the latest formations. A field beside the pub becomes a crappie campsite. On a summer's day, it can resemble a hippie enclave from the 1960s.
It's like any phenomena that comes along. Like you've got one in America like Bigfoot. It starts off with a photograph or a footprint, and then it's captured on camera. It gets bigger and bigger. And you get people coming in, exploiting it. This is the same, but this phenomena is real. The magic that's coming out, people are jumping on it without even thinking.
What draws these pilgrims to the formations is more than pretty designs. The spaces within the formations are thought to be fountains of mysterious energy.
There were a lot of effects in this. Did you hear some of the things?
Electronic instruments are known to go haywire. Batteries go dead. Compasses spin wildly. Wristwatches spontaneously change time. Some male visitors even experience erections upon entering a crop circle in what's come to be known as the Viagra effect.
And I've had lots of strange effects, most of which I keep to myself, because you think, I don't want to get locked in a lunatic asylum, I want to be able to travel around freely. But there are lots of strange things that go on, and you just have to sort of file them away.
Personally, I've experienced things that defy logic, defy what I've ever learned about how we interact with our environment.
My father walked into a centre of the circle and he came over very faint and fell on the ground. I had to help him up and take him out of the formation with another chap which was in the formation at the time. These things happen quite regularly.
Explanations range from ambient radiation to rogue electromagnetic fields. But no one knows for sure what's causing all these bizarre effects. Still, they keep on happening, generating hundreds of reports.
There's a reason why we keep coming back. Besides the current theory that, as the English say, they're nutters.
By June 1991, the craze reaches royal proportions. After Prince Charles discovers some circles on his property, he becomes fascinated. Charles and Diana ask Colin Andrews to give them a personal tour of the season's crop circles, but then word leaks out.
It hit the national headlines here in the Today national newspaper, and all of the plans were cancelled.
Shortly thereafter, Andrews and crappies everywhere would receive more unwelcome headlines. September 1991 brings a thunderbolt in the world press. Two men from southern England claim to know the secret of the circles. As we continue, the great hoaxer controversy and how to make your own crop circle.
My name's John Lumberg, I'm a circle maker, and these are tools of my trade.
The debate continues to swirl whether crop circles are the work of extraterrestrials, freak storms, or two guys named Doug and Dave. Douglas Bauer and David Chorley, that is. In September 1991, the pair from southern England come forward to claim a £10,000 reward offered by a British newspaper. Crop circles are all a hoax, they say, and it is they who are the hoaxers. According to Bauer, the idea dates back to the 1960s. He is living in Australia at the time when the country is swept by a wave of UFO sightings. They are linked to mysterious circular impressions left in grass or grain.
And it became popular to call them UFO nests at the time, which is why a lot of people thought that crop circles were caused by UFO, and even to this day some people still believe that, although the majority of us don't.
Bauer then moves back to England, only to run into still more flying saucers. UFO sightings are epidemic in the Wiltshire area in the 1970s, but they never leave behind any tangible proof for Bauer or anyone else to see.
So one day he decided that if he couldn't see anything inexplicable, he wanted to give a gift actually to other people, to put something down that was seemingly inexplicable.
Bauer recruits his drinking buddy, David Chorley, into his circle-making conspiracy. From 1978 to 1990, they make many simple crop circles.
The circles that we created in 1978 with the standing walls of corn as if they'd been cut out of pastry with a knife, they were our doing, and we started it way back in that time.
Then, when Dr. Meaden's vortex theory seems to account for simple formations, it is Doug and Dave who up the ante.
And the way they did this was to instantly make the circles more complex. To add a few straight lines. And suddenly Terence Meaden's theory kind of went out the window because he was desperately trying to explain why suddenly now, rather than just circles, we had groupings of circles, circles with rings, circles with lines and bars coming out of them. And so obviously he eventually kind of gave in.
After confessing to the press in 1991, Doug and Dave retire from circle making, but they are soon followed by the so-called copycats.
My name's John Lumberg, I'm a circle maker, and these are tools of my trade. This is a surveying tape that we use for marking out geometry, and this is called a stalk stumper, which we use for flattening the crop.
John Lundberg claims that he has made more than 100 crop circles, but he refuses to say which ones, believing that much of the impact of the designs comes from their aura of mystery.
It's problematic. As an artist, I can't claim my work, because if I claim it, I destroy it. But it comes with the territory.
Fabricating a crop circle is a three-step process. First, the surveyor's tape is paid out to a specific diameter. Then one person holds the tape while another paces off the circle in the crop. Finally, the whole circular area is flattened down with a stalk stumper, which is a board about 4 feet long with a simple rope handle. Complex patterns are created by multiplying the circles and adding flourishes. More than 1,500 circles can go into the making of a single formation. Circle makers often encode the patterns with sacred geometries and magic symbolism, conveying the all-important sense of mystery to the audience.
I mean, they basically project their own belief systems onto our formations. You could say that they act as like huge Rorschach tests, like an ink block test. So we put these ink block tests down, kind of writ large in the fields of Wiltshire.
Some people see this as incredible art. Some people see it as healing centers. Others as extraterrestrial communication. And others simply vandalism.
With the confessions of these very human circle makers comes a collective sigh of relief.
The public talk was of, well, it's all been a hoax then, hasn't it?
Three-quarters of the public immediately lost interest. We've never ever recovered the numbers that we had interested in that time. And a lot of people, when you talk to them, they said, but I thought that was all explained. It was these two people, Doug and Dave, that were doing it.
Mystery solved. Crop circles explained. Or are they? There appear to be large gaps in the Doug and Dave story. For one, of course, there were the UFO nests in Australia that inspired Bauer in the first place. Then there is the matter of geography. From 1978 to the early 90s, they claim they were the only ones making circles. But how can a worldwide phenomenon be explained by two guys with a tape and a board?
They, of course, have never been able to explain away how they made the circles in Australia and Canada and the United States and in Russia. Very clearly, we did not have an international conspiracy on our hands. We had one local claim, which was accepted by the media for reasons I cannot explain.
A number of other arguments are marshaled against the hoaxers. One is based on the scientifically measurable condition of the plants. Some circles contain plants that look mangled. In others, they seem to have gently fallen over, untouched by human hands.
What we're really looking for is to see if any weight has been applied. And when people go in with stomping boards and planks, that's applying weight, and you damage the crops. In the genuine ones, the crops are totally undamaged.
A new picture of the phenomenon begins to emerge. There are the man-made or hoaxed formations, which are generally the most complex and which appear mostly in southern England. Then there are the so-called genuine crop circles, which occur throughout the world. These tend to be simple in design, though subtle in detail.
When you come into view of a genuine crop circle, everything you'd thought you'd be able to explain so easily is knocked sideways. You're suddenly faced with this pristine geometric shape in a cereal field with no tram lines, no visible means of access, and you're hooked.
And the long-time experts, the farmers, seem to agree.
There's a big difference between the simple ones, which we term, which is a phenomenon of the earth or something like that, than these fancy-dancy ones.
And slowly but surely, the Doug and Dave story lost its ground and credibility, and more so, people began to once again question, well, why are they still occurring?
Indeed, every year in the mature grain, the baffling formations return. And slowly, so do the croppies. Incredibly, the phenomenon has staged a comeback. Can crop circles, after all, be more than a hoax? As we continue, the most compelling evidence yet comes to light. And this time it doesn't come from science, but from history.
The research that I've done has demonstrated beyond doubt that the crop circles go back well beyond 1978, well before that, right through the decades.
The 1991 hoaxing scandal devastates the crop circle community. But for historians among them, it is a blessing in disguise. If they can find proof of crop circles before 1978, the year that Doug and Dave started operating, the hoaxing argument would be discredited, the mystery restored. Historians set out to build their case.
Before 1980, we recorded some 400 circles in about 290-odd cases, some of which were multiple cases. That's not to say that's the total sum, but they were the ones that were actually documented, and we can find hard copy for.
The research that I've done has demonstrated beyond doubt that the crop circles go back well beyond 1978, well before that, right through the decades.
It is a particularly sinister report from Minnesota that seems to clinch the argument. At first, the farmer does not even notice the crop circles. What does alarm him is his dead calf, which has been mutilated.
Now, what's of great importance, the site at which this calf was found was flown over a couple of days later, and a photographer, he looked down at the field and he found 47 crop circles scattered across this field in long chains around the edge of the field, 47 separate circles, all in the same field.
The year was 1975, 3 years before Doug and Dave began making circles, and thousands of miles away from their home in England.
To find 47 circles in a field in the 1970s is something which at the time was utterly unprecedented. We don't have any numbers even approaching that many until well into the 1990s. So this is an important historical finding a quarter of a century ago now.
The phenomenon seems to have come full circle, bringing us back to the original question, where do crop circles come from?
In our body. Here's the information, hard facts, scientific evidence, real good stuff that we can get engaged in here, and already the scientific debate has begun.
In August 2000, Colin Andrews announces a major development in his decade-long study into the phenomenon. It makes news all over the world. And for both Croppy and skeptics, it is a shocker.
There will be more evidence. It is earth-shattering if people are not prepared for the fact that we are being deceived.
Andrews concludes that 80% of the complex formations are man-made. Old-fashioned detective work makes for part of his findings. Andrews hires people to stake out fields and tail known circle makers. In several cases, he catches them in the act on camera.
The evidence was being stacked up, some of it on film, low-light and image intensifier cameras, that some of the more complex, intricate, very beautiful patterns were being made by artists or just simply hoaxers. There are tracks underneath the plants from access points, like the tractor tire marks entering the field. There are tracks that are 3 inches in width, which it coincides with the width of the shoe, the human shoe, to the very points where they need to stand to construct them. That's good evidence to start with if you're looking for people as a possibility.
But what of the remaining 20%? Andrews believes that some of these may also be the work of hoaxers. An intriguing few, however, show no signs of being man-made. Andrews' best guess is that these, the so-called genuine crop circles, are the product of electromagnetism. Strong electromagnetic fields not only zap the plants and cause electronic instruments to fail, they also leave their fingerprints on the scene.
We have a small number of them in which we've now recorded that the Earth's magnetic field is mimicking the crop design in the field. It's not only retaining the pattern, it's amplifying the level of magnetism, the magnetic force, and is rotating it by about 3 degrees.
Andrews' announcements have done little to quell the controversy. Hardcore croppies reject his estimate that 80% are hoaxes. Skeptics reject the notion that any circles are genuine. The only thing everyone agrees on is that the circles are here to stay.
If anything was going to explain away the circles, the theory that they're all man-made would have done it. That theory was posed 10 years ago, and we're still here sitting talking about crop circles. So the mystery is stronger than ever.
The real phenomenon continues to be there. It's where it was when it began. It's where I'm sure it'll be where it is when the hoaxers and the artists return to London. It's ongoing. We're looking at perhaps hundreds of years here of a phenomenon we still have not got anywhere really near completely answering.
A year later,
the circles are still where they were and they look the same. They haven't changed
In
much.
the years since 3 crop circles appeared on Carl and Pat Kuhn's wheat farm, the mystery has actually deepened. Nothing has grown in 2 of the circles. Not even weeds.
There is a difference or things that we should be looking for that...
one circle has no weeds growing in it whatsoever, nothing. I'm really mystified at that. I just don't know what could cause something like that. You know, it would be nice to be able to harness something like that.
Nor has the year yielded any clues on who or what might have created the circles. But one thing seems sure. If hoaxers made these circles, they weren't publicity seekers.
From that testing, no one else would have even thought of going there, would have had no reason to go there, because it's out in the middle of nothing, nowhere. few over. It would have been no challenge
the big one over there,
for anyone to do something like this, because I'm sure it would have never been discovered had it not been for the harvest time.
You can see there's weeds surrounding it. Well, I don't know. I'm at a total loss to it. I know it's some kind of an energy force, but I have no explanation of what it would be or would be.
You don't think there's any possible way that winds of some kind could have done this?
Absolutely.
You've never seen anything like this in your farming time?
No way to...
It's very bizarre and unknown.
Very bizarre.
So bizarre that some people think it is literally out of the ordinary. There is a fourth dimension, they say, a parallel reality that conventional science cannot explain, and of which we only catch fleeting glimpses, such as, perhaps, crop circles.
What I'm seeing is the possible enlargement of what we perceive to be reality, which is absolutely fascinating.
What does the goldfish make of the fingerprints on the bowl? They appear near feeding time, perhaps, and he walks around and perhaps on Friday afternoons they get polished away and another one appears. And it's much the same with crop circles. They may well be some being or some force reaching us from another dimension, and this is the imprint they leave behind.
Strange imprints that appear by night and vanish with the harvest, but linger long in the imagination.
We've come on in such leaps and bounds that I do believe this phenomenon stands a chance of being explained eventually, but I think everybody has to keep an open mind and say, well, the jury is still out.
You can't build an empire in one day, but a week should be just enough. The History Channel brings you a whole week filled with the empires and emperors who ruled the world.
They moved very fast. They were excellent horsemen.
The Great Empires Week, all this week at 8 on the History Channel.
Are we alone? To this day, the inhabitants of planet Earth have looked to the stars for proof of other life. But the truth isn't out there, it's in here. Since World War II, the British government has been watching us, watching the skies. Buried in the vaults of the Ministry of Defense are thousands of reports on UFO sightings, some left unexplained. But now, after decades of secrecy, the files are being released. And for the first time, the truth about Britain's UFOs is revealed. A near mid-air collision.
I can't speculate on what it was, I really can't. I mean, I don't know to this day what it was.
A World War II bomber's close encounter.
I don't talk about it too much to people, only close friends.
An unidentified object caught on radar. And new evidence on one of the most celebrated UFO cases, the Welsh Roswell.
If it could be shown that any UFOs were extraterrestrial in origin, people's entire belief system would fundamentally change.
Strange, unexplained stories that leave many wondering if there really is life out there. What are 3 popular word searches on the internet? Perhaps the first 2 are no surprise. UFOs have an incredible hold on the popular imagination, but few myths have involved government investigations, surveillance, and cover-ups. UFOs have. One person who knows just how seriously UFO sightings have been taken by the British authorities is ex-MOD operative Nick Pope.
From 1952 onwards, it was decided that there really needed to be a small unit set up permanently to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon. And really from the 50s right up until 2009, the Ministry of Defense did have a small project looking at the UFO mystery.
Pope manned the UFO desk in the 90s, helping add to the thousands of files the ministry had gathered for decades. Now that they're being released from the vaults, key UFO eyewitnesses give their side of the stories. And UFO experts, skeptics and believers interrogate just what the MOD was keeping secret. Dr. David Clark is the journalist who helped first persuade the MOD to release the files.
If you look in the files, there are thousands of unusual things up in the sky from right across the British Isles. There's absolutely no doubt that people see things in the sky that they can't identify. They always have done.
January 6th, 1995. Two experienced pilots of a Boeing 737 carrying 60 passengers from Milan to Manchester report a near collision. It's an incredible sighting of an unidentified flying object which sends the authorities into a spin.
In the defence files, there are quite a number of incidents involving near misses between civil aircraft and unidentified flying objects. The most impressive of all was a report that was made by the crew of a British Airways 737.
Speedbird 5061, overhead pennines 9 miles.
They were just about to enter this cloud bank, quite a clear sky, good sort of vision. Suddenly the first officer said he saw this object coming towards him like an illuminated Christmas tree.
What the hell?
It was so low in its approach and so close that he automatically ducked, thinking there was going to be a collision. This thing just zoomed past, and immediately he turned to the captain and said, "Did you see that?" The captain said, "Yeah, I saw it as well."
Immediately the pilots radioed into Manchester Control Tower.
There's a lot of concern amongst air crews about what damage could be done to the reputation if they became known as, you know, the crew that see flying saucers. So it was interesting in this case that despite that, these two air crew decided that when they landed they were going to file an official air miss report. So that would then trigger a full detailed investigation by the Civil Aviation Authority, which is exactly what happened.
For the first time, the MOD files show how this extraordinary incident sparked a full-scale investigation conducted by aircraft near-miss investigator Anthony Booth.
Well, it was unusual for a start because it was the only one in my memory in 7 years of working in that particular department that I'd actually dealt with something like this. We could talk to the pilots, both the pilots. We would go through looking at radar recordings, RT transcript recordings of the voices of the pilots, recordings of what Manchester Air Traffic Control had to say. We just looked at anything that might shed some light on what this object might have been.
The pilots now refuse to talk publicly about the near crash, but the MOD files recall what they told Anthony Booth at the time.
My attention was initially focused on the glare shield in front of me, but I was diverted by something in my peripheral vision. The object had a number of small white lights, rather like a Christmas tree. The high speed of the object, although unable to estimate its distance, it was very close.
There's a transcript of the conversation between the captain of the 737 and ground control.
This is Speedbird 5061. We just had something go down the right-hand side, just above us, very fast.
And Manchester immediately come back and say, well, there's nothing seen on radar.
Was it an aircraft? Well, it had lights. It went down the starboard side very quickly.
Manchester say, and just above you?
Just slightly above us, yes.
Manchester then advise them to keep an eye out for anything, but they can't see anything at all. It must have been very fast.
It will go down very quickly after it passed you, I think. Okay, well, there you go.
The Manchester Control Tower could not find any radar signal. To radar expert Doug Robb, this is extraordinary.
It says the likelihood of such activity escaping detection is remote, as the area is well served by several radars, and any movement at the levels in question would almost certainly have generated a radar response. Nothing was seen.
So what was it that avoided radar detection? The MOD files show that the investigators and pilots considered all the possibilities.
It was a hang glider. At night, he's suicidal.
Hang glider would not be picked up by normal radar, no.
Comet? No, I don't think so.
A meteor could be detected on re-entry if the radar was looking exactly in the right direction as that piece of debris went past at some speed.
Military? Maybe, but I didn't recognise it. But we're near a major airport. It would have shown up on the radar response. Spy plane? I don't think so. Didn't look like a stealth.
Stealth aircraft would not be picked up by normal radars. If a spy plane is being kept secret, it's not going to be flying where people can see it. And certainly nowhere near airliners.
UFO? That'd be daft. I don't know.
These pilots are not lying. They did have an unusual experience, which to them remains baffling.
The files show the investigation seriously analysed the possibility of military activity, but they found no evidence from any official source.
It seems most unlikely that such a flight would have been conducted so close to a busy international airport.
So what was it? We revealed the conclusion, locked away in the MOD vaults since 1995, reached by Anthony Booth's investigation.
Most of the incidents that we looked at, we could arrive at some conclusion, definite conclusion, but in this case, we couldn't really. We had to come up with an assessment of cause and risk. Both the risk and the cause were unassessable.
Degree of risk, unassessable. Cause, unassessable. Really, that statement is really, really unusual to find that in an official air miss report, and it's basically saying we don't have a clue what was seen.
What they'll say back at BA.
I think they might rib us about this one.
At the end of their the summary of the working group's discussions, it says that there is no doubt that these pilots both saw an object and that it was of sufficient significance to prompt an air miss report. Unfortunately, the nature and identity of this object remains unknown. To speculate about extraterrestrial activity, fascinating though it may be, is not within the group's remit and must be left to those whose interest lies in this field.
To some ufologists like Nick Pope, the absence of any real conclusion leaves serious and unanswered questions.
Now, to me, this was quite extraordinary. UFO does not mean alien spacecraft, but clearly, in some people's minds, whether it was the pilot and the first officer, or whether it was the investigators at the Civil Aviation Authority or the Ministry of Defence, clearly somebody was thinking, well, maybe, just maybe, this is something extraterrestrial.
I can't speculate on what it was, I really can't. I mean, I don't know to this day what it was. All I know is that we can't assume we know everything in this day and age. There may be things that we don't know about.
The Manchester near-miss investigation shows just how seriously unexplained sightings were taken by the MOD. But the UFO desk had been receiving reports from pilots for decades. The files reveal sightings during World War II, and in some cases these were considered so grave they were referred right to the top of government. The newly released UFO files confirm what many experts suspected. The British government was investigating unexplained sightings as far back as World War II.
I don't talk about it too much to people, only close friends who experienced perhaps flying during the war.
Spring 1944. Britain was engaged in heavy bombing raids over Germany. Rumours of strange, unidentified missiles were getting through to top command. Considered a threat to public morale, the MOD files reveal that the order to keep them secret came right from the top. Sightings, such as the one seen by gunner Bernard Dye.
Now I have here a personal wartime diary. I'll read you an entry which I wrote on the 26th of April. Operation Essen. 300 aircraft raided Essen.
Dye then recorded the most extraordinary sight.
By unidentified objects, which I describe as just red balls of fire.
This is the first time Bernard Dye has spoken on television about what happened that night.
We left the target area and we were heading back towards Mildenhall, our base. We were heading across France. Everything appeared to be peaceful. Suddenly I saw 3 balls of fire coming up from below and reported this to our pilot, Arthur Horton, on the intercom. A few seconds afterwards, the rear gunner, Brian Harper, he observed 2 more red balls of fire. Immediately, Arthur was a bit perturbed, and were they fighters? No, not fighters, Arthur, just balls of fire coming towards us. I said to Arthur, no, evasive action, corkscrew, starboard, go, go, go. We travelled over 300 miles per hour. The aircraft was shaking like a leaf, and still they were following. The pilot was getting worried about burning the engines up. Engineer, Dave, what about the engines? Never mind the engines, skipper. Keep going, or something to that effect. The words were rather rude. It certainly gave me and the crew the willies to see them. After a short distance, these 5 red objects, they just got slower, and the red lights disappeared into the blackness below, and we got safely home. Well, when we got back to Mildenhall, our base, You know, each crew is interrogated by intelligence officers, and they just laughed at us. And this upset the pilot, and, you know, he said, "You wouldn't bloody well have been laughing if you'd have been sitting with us in the aircraft."
What did Gunner Bernard Dye think they were?
Didn't know what to think, but I thought they were just a new weapon that the Germans had invented.
Bernard Dye was not alone. Other World War II aircrew had also reported unexplained sightings, and we now know that at least one of these reports was suppressed, and the order to do so came right from the top. Wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill was so terrified the report would leak out, he ordered a 50-year blackout.
Mr. Churchill declared that the UFO incident should be immediately classified for at least 50 years, and its status reviewed by a future Prime Minister.
Churchill's order referred specifically to a late World War II sighting made by a British aircrew returning from a reconnaissance mission over Germany. The files record,
"My grandfather was present during a debate about an unexpected incident experienced by an RAF bomber crew."
The MOD files show that the story originates from the grandson of Churchill's bodyguard, who had been present at an urgent meeting between the Prime Minister and the US commander of the Allied forces, General Eisenhower, who discussed the incident together.
He was writing in to see if the ministry could confirm this story, that this guy who was the bodyguard was present at a discussion between Winston Churchill and Eisenhower about a mysterious incident when the crew of a Royal Air Force reconnaissance aircraft that had seen this metallic object that had appeared by the side of their aircraft, and it followed the aircraft, and it behaved in a way that was completely unexplainable in terms of it being, you know, a German aircraft or any other sort of Nazi flying machine that they were aware of.
A leading aircraft expert was also at the meeting.
He dismissed any possibility that it could be a missile, since a missile could not suddenly match its speed with a slower aircraft and then accelerate again.
Churchill was determined this would go no further.
Another person at the meeting raised the possibility of an unidentified flying object, at which point Mr. Churchill declared that the incident should be immediately classified.
But the file goes further. One extraordinary line explains just how fearful Churchill was of public reaction to this UFO sighting, if it ever got out.
This event should be immediately classified, since it would create mass panic amongst the general population and destroy one's belief in the church.
But the files also reveal that this wasn't the first time Churchill had got embroiled in UFO sightings.
In October 1912, there was sightings of mysterious lights in the sky over the dockyards at Sheerness in Essex. Winston Churchill was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he had to look into this, and Churchill had to admit in Parliament that he couldn't explain what had been seen.
The files show that even after the war, Churchill took a personal interest in unexplained sightings.
In the aftermath of the sightings in Washington, D.C. in 1952, that made all the news headlines, Winston Churchill again became interested and sent a memo to the Secretary of State for Air. What does all this stuff about flying saucers amount to? What can it mean? What is the truth? Let me have a report at your convenience.
Until now, Gunner Bernard Dye never knew there were other World War II sightings that Churchill wanted kept secret at such a critical time in the war. We showed him the newly released MOD file on Churchill.
Well, after reading this report, it sounds, you know, really identical to what we witnessed and saw that night. I haven't heard of this before, but it doesn't surprise me that he was told about it, because things happened during the war years, and there were other objects obviously appeared.
It's interesting that during the 1940s there were a very large number of sightings reported by aircrew, and there are various Royal Air Force files at the National Archives that detail some of these reports, rocket phenomena they were described as, but they were never able to explain them. And at the end of the war, when they debriefed some of the Luftwaffe pilots, they said that they'd seen very similar things themselves, and they thought they were Allied secret weapons.
So is there an explanation as to what the aircrew saw? Dave Clark has his own theory.
They just thought that it was a combination of misperception on part of the aircrew. They were expecting enemy action because they were so charged up on adrenaline.
UFO or not, the files show that the World War II leaders were desperate to keep such sightings away from the public. The next file reveals how, even decades later, the government was still panicking about UFOs. Many UFO experts believe that the Pitlochry file illustrates one of the most significant UFO conspiracies of recent times. It involves photographs of an unidentified object captured flying over a remote Scottish valley. The photos were sent to the MOD, but mysteriously went missing. Journalist Mark Pilkington has spent years trying to track down these UFO images.
The Pitlochry photographs in the MOD files date back to the 4th of August 1990, when two witnesses on the A9 near Calvine, near Pitlochry, allegedly saw a large diamond-shaped craft hovering in the air for about 10 minutes and took 6 photographs of it. And the object that they claimed to have seen was accompanied by 2 aircraft, which the MOD later identified as Harriers.
The photographer has never been identified. He sent the 6 photographs to the Scottish Daily Record newspaper. The paper never ran the story. Instead, they referred them to the MOD for investigation.
The Ministry of Defence took their own copies of the photographs, which have since disappeared. They, according to the files, sent the original negatives back to the Scottish Daily Record, which inexplicably never ran a story on the subject and never published the photographs, and presumably returned them to the 2 men whose names have been removed from the file, so we can't ask the 2 men. So mystery piled upon mystery.
All that remains in the files is a photocopy of the alleged photographs. Ufologists later mocked up this photo of what was seen. But Nick Pope dealt with the original photos and file when he worked behind the MOD desk.
Both the Defence Intelligence Staff and the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Centre analysed this very carefully, and the consensus was clear on this. This was a real object. It was maybe 25, 30 metres in diameter. I sat down with my opposite number from the Defence Intelligence Staff at a briefing about UFOs. We discussed this photograph extensively. This was something that was of defence interest, because clearly it could do something that we couldn't, and we wanted that technology.
The MOD was determined to play down the incident.
There's an interesting briefing by the Ministry of Defence press office on defensive lines to take if these photographs made it into the newspapers, and they were asked questions about this. And there's a list that basically says that we have looked at the photographs and no definitive conclusions have been reached regarding the large diamond-shaped object. And if they were pressed by the media, they were told to say all sighting reports received by the Ministry are referred to the staff in the departments which are responsible for the air defence of the UK.
During his time with the Ministry, Pope had a blown-up copy of the photograph on his office wall, until it was personally taken down by his superior.
One suggestion was that this was a secret prototype American spy plane. My head of division convinced himself that this probably was some secret aircraft or drone, and he ordered that this be removed.
We know from the files that there was a lot of internal discussion about, were the Americans flying this incredible spy plane, and if so, why had they not asked for permission, for this thing to fly through British airspace?
Journalist Mark Pilkington believes that events at the time could well have influenced what people thought they had seen.
This was just 2 days after the first Gulf War had broken out, and there were certainly great deployments of aircraft towards the Middle East, and the UK was a kind of sort of stop-off point and a sort of launch pad for a lot of those aircraft.
The MOD were clearly worried about public reaction, just as Churchill had been 4 decades earlier. So was there a cover-up by the MOD over the mysterious Pitlochry photographs?
There's a possibility that the Ministry of Defence destroyed these images, possibly because they thought that they were some American spy plane that they'd rather we didn't know about, or maybe if this thing genuinely remained unexplained, because we simply didn't want the embarrassment of saying that there might be things in our airspace with speeds and manoeuvres that exceed everything that we've got, and yet which remain unexplained.
However, all we're basing this on, we should make clear, is a very grainy, fuzzy black and white image that, for all I know, could have been drawn by a child with crayons.
Mark Pilkington is still looking for the real Pitlochry photographs, to find out just what did put Britain's defences to the test. But 6 years later, on Britain's east coast, another UFO sighting sparks off a full-scale military investigation and a direct challenge to the Secretary of State for Defence. In 1996, the Ministry of Defence was drawn into a serious breach of UK defences by a UFO over East Anglia. MOD files reveal it not only involved the police, Coast Guard and RAF, but a call to the Defence Secretary to scramble jet fighters.
I'm very concerned about an incident that occurred off the East Anglian coast recently involving a visual unidentified flying craft sighting that was correlated by various different military radar systems. Why weren't our jets scrambled?
It was one of the biggest UFO scares ever. And it all started one quiet October night on the East Coast.
It was the police officers, actually, who phoned in the first reports. There's an extract from that. In the early hours of the morning, the police are saying we can see a red and green rotating light in the sky directly southeast from Skegness. It looks to be high in the sky directly over the Wash.
The patrol officers reported the sighting to the station sergeant.
I immediately phoned it through to the Skegness control room, who relayed it onto Great Yarmouth Coast Guard Maritime Rescue, suspecting it might be an incident over the sea.
We had a report at about 3:15 local time from Skegness Police, and they could actually see this light in a southeasterly direction. We were uncertain of what it was at the time, and we immediately made a report to the local air defence radars to see if they could see anything.
The call went through to RAF Neatishead, the most important air defence centre in southern England.
Clancy radar has a contact bearing at 221 degrees at...
They noticed that on one of the radars, a blip that they couldn't identify, that wasn't an aircraft.
Could the mysterious radar blip and the strange lights seen by the police be the same thing? Panic calls from the public started to come in.
No, I don't think they're invading.
The call was put out to shipping to keep a lookout for unidentified lights. Then a tanker came back.
We're seeing a group of lights above the Wash.
The vessel at sea was the Connor Coast, and she was in much this sort of area.
At 3:50 a.m., Patrol Officer P.C. Leyland rushed onto the police station roof to video the strange lights and managed to capture 5 minutes of footage now showing a single stationary white light. News of the sighting spread quickly through the UFO grapevine.
The transcript of the conversation between the Coast Guard and the police and the trawler crew was leaked to the local news, and it suddenly became this huge UFO incident that got to the attention of the local MP.
The sighting gathered such momentum, even local Labour MP Martin Redmond got embroiled and started asking difficult questions.
Martin Redmond said, look, you've got police officers seeing UFOs, you've got Royal Air Force officers tracking them on radar, and yet you don't even get the aircraft in the air to take a look at this thing.
Here's a copy of the letter that Martin Redmond MP sent to the Right Honourable Michael Portillo, Secretary of State for Defence, and he says, I'm very concerned about an incident that occurred off the East Anglian coast recently involving a visual unidentified flying craft sighting, which was correlated by various different military radar systems. While I'm interested in finding out what was seen, my primary concern stems from the absolute shambles that such an event seemed to cause. So he's really sort of having a go at the Ministry of Defence and saying, why didn't you react to this? What are the RAF doing? So this really stung the RAF.
The files reveal a picture of chaos. The letter sparked off an MOD investigation to explain the RAF's resistance. Doug Robb was operations manager on the night. We showed him the MOD findings. He wasn't surprised by the conclusions.
This diagram is the radar plots over Boston on that night. And in summary, it shows that Claxby picked up the object, but it didn't move, and it was on land. And after investigation, it was decided that it was the church tower, the Boston Stump, as it's known.
The files were certain this was the culprit.
The church is known in aviation circles as the Boston Stump, and appears occasionally on some radars in certain radar propagation conditions.
They said that this was a completely separate phenomenon to the bright stationary lights that had been seen by the police from Boston and Skegness and by the tanker crew.
The report concluded there was no justification to order the scramble of RAF fighters, much to the chagrin of the local MP, Martin Redmond.
You'd scramble for a high-speed incoming aircraft 200 miles away, but you're not going to scramble aircraft for a fixed object on land. I mean, what's the threat?
If what the radar picked up was indeed a church, what then were the mysterious lights seen by the police and the tanker crew? The MOD scrutinized the police video footage.
It suggests a distant celestial source.
The MOD sent the footage onto the Royal Greenwich Observatory for analysis. Their report has been kept buried since 1996 in the MOD files. UFO and astronomy expert Ian Ridpath was shown their conclusions and the police video.
If you look at the police video, you can see it's just a bright dot of light just sitting there, not appearing to do anything. So, to me, this shows that Even the most impeccable witnesses can actually make what is really a basic mistake, which is just misidentifying bright celestial objects. Well, the most common culprit is the planet Venus. In fact, it's called the queen of the UFOs, and this is because it's the brightest object in the night sky after the sun and the moon, which could have been what the police were seeing.
He also believes there's an explanation for the colours of the lights.
When the camera zooms in, very often the camera will completely lose focus, and you can actually see some odd shape to the light, which is actually the diaphragm of the camera.
But this doesn't explain what the tanker crew observed. The MOD investigation found that they saw a light coming from a different direction to Venus. And they were baffled.
These lights remain unexplained.
But expert Ian Ridpath believes there is an answer.
The object that the tanker saw to the north, I think, was another bright star called Vega, which is also just appearing to twinkle and flash multicolored lights.
UFO expert and skeptic Dave Clark believes there is a reason why this escalated into such a major incident.
This happened in 1996, which was the very height of the popularity of the X-Files series on TV. It was the biggest sort of year, the 1996-97, in terms of number of reports they received since 1978.
So is this case closed for East Anglia? Or will more mystery emerge, just as it has, with one of Britain's most celebrated cases that refuses to go away, the Welsh Roswell? In 1974, in North Wales, thousands of people experienced a violent earth tremor and lights were seen falling from the sky. Some ufologists believe a UFO crashed, and there's been a cover-up ever since of the Welsh Roswell.
Oh, a heck of a bang, yes. Oh, yes, it's like a tremor. It was in the house, shook the houses, really new houses.
And it seemed to come right on top of their head until the house was coming down.
There were lights coming from the top of the mountain, just up over there.
24th of January 1974 at 21:50 GMT. 5 bodies spectacularly incandescent were observed traversing the sky.
New information has been revealed that opens the mystery further. Named as one of the main witnesses in the Berwyn incident is Hugh Lloyd, then a 14-year-old farmer's son. Just after 8:30 p.m., Hugh's family felt the massive earth tremor. It was a frightening experience. Almost 40 years on, Hugh still remembers that day as if it were yesterday.
It was like this thud, and straight away the whole place started shaking very violently. The light flickered in the lights in the picture on television, snow on the screen. But we were all frightened. We didn't have a clue what it was. And Enoch said it must be an explosion. And then the phone started ringing. Hello? Like neighbours, phoning to ask, did you feel that? And then roughly about 20 minutes, there was a knock on the door. And there was a police officer there. And he said, we've had reports there's a plane crash that's come down on the Berwyn, and we'd like to commandeer your Land Rover to go up there. Me being 14, I said, well, Enoch, you better drive it. We carried on up the mountain about half a mile, maybe 3/4. We drove up the track and we stopped, got out and got torches, and it was very quiet and very dark, but nothing to be seen.
How are we going with the torch?
One of them said, there's nothing here. It's too quiet. We can't see anything. We might as well go down. So we turned back to the vehicles, and as we were approaching the vehicles, we saw this very bright white light. It's up the valley, just behind those trees there, up to the left in the valley between those two mountains. A very bright white light, coming up from the ground, pointing upwards. But it was, very, very bright. I knew it was coming from the ground, but we couldn't actually see the source of the light because it was, in the valley itself, being hidden. The light didn't look like a plane crash. It was too white for a fire. It didn't last for very long. 20 seconds was at the most.
They searched the mountainside, but there was no sign of a crash. So what was the light? Ufologist Andy Roberts has researched the Berwyn UFO for years. Although a skeptic, he admits there is a central mystery to the incident involving another key witness.
In a village nearby called Llanderfel, there was a district nurse called Pat Evans. She felt the explosion there, and because she was a nurse and had all the medical equipment, thought, if a plane's crashed, I could get up there and give much-needed help until the emergency services arrived.
Pat Evans was with her 2 teenage daughters, 4 miles from Hugh Lloyd when the earth tremor hit.
So she picked up her 2 young daughters, got them in the car, drove the 10-15 minute drive up onto the B4391 road, expecting to see an aircraft crashed and in flames. This is the road that she was driving on, and it's a road that she knew very well, so she had no problems driving up here at night. And obviously she was out there looking for what she thought was going to be a plane disaster. And just as she came out from the other side of this copse of trees, she was absolutely astonished to see, far across the hills to the left, a huge ball of red, white, orange, pulsating light.
Whatever the object was, it was too far from the road to be reached on foot. Pat and her daughters watched, astounded at the ball of light, slowly pulsating and changing colour.
She described it as being half the size of the moon, and around this object were moving torch lights and vehicle lights. She realised that it clearly wasn't a crashed aircraft and that someone or some people were there attending to whatever it was, and realising that, she drove back home and went to bed, and to this day is completely mystified by what it was.
So what did Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd see that night? We reveal that even the arrival of the mysterious men in black couldn't provide all the answers. The unidentified sightings by Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd in Berwyn, Wales in 1974 have gone down in UFO folklore. The recently released MOD files have added even more mystery. Researchers from the British Geological Survey were quickly dispatched to Berwyn to investigate an earth tremor that had registered 3.5 on the Richter scale.
Immediately after the earthquake, we were getting a lot of reports, some of them rather complex ones, about lights in the sky, lights on the hill. So I brought a small team of people down to ask the local people around here what they'd seen, what they'd heard, what they'd felt.
The British Geological Survey team have become known in Berwyn legend as the Men in Black, as they were dressed in dark suits, official-looking, and were going door to door.
Some people seem to think the whole event was rather suspicious, and that we, simple scientists from the Geological Survey, had something to do with suspicious events around here.
Files containing Chris's notes recall his interview with nurse Pat Evans, who saw the unidentified light.
I have here the notes that I made when I talked to Pat Evans. She felt the shaking, but also she was very concerned about lights that she saw in the sky. She thought there was a big red light, like a glowing red fire. This is a copy of one of the maps that we, with our team, used when we were going around the area talking to people. And we were able, therefore, to put on the map exactly where we got that interview from, and therefore exactly what that person saw, heard and felt.
This British Geological Survey map, buried in the vaults, is a revelation. It shows the anomalous lights seen by Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd both appeared in the same small area of hillside at the same time. Ufologist Andy Roberts returns to the same spot on the mountainside where Pat and her daughters saw the UFO, and where Pat Evans told her story to Andy Roberts in 1998.
When I brought Pat Evans up onto this mountain road in 1998 and she told me her story then, I photographed her, and the photograph that I took showed her pointing to where she saw what she saw in 1974, and judging by this photograph, she was pointing over there, and which we know is where the police and farmers were searching that night.
Pat Evans was on the Llangannock to Welshpool Road, which is just beyond the forestry there. So if she was there, she probably saw the same lights as we saw. You know, because just dead in line. I'm nearly positive that's the same lights as she saw.
The recent files show the MOD's explanation for the sudden explosion and mysterious lights.
Subsequent search of the hillsides in question revealed no sign of impact, however. The Meteorological Office considered that these sightings could have been occasioned by a bolide, that is to say a meteor which enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up before reaching the ground. A private investigation done on behalf of the British Astronomical Society concluded, however, that the meteor may in fact have disintegrated over Manchester, and that its appearance was preceded at 8:30 p.m. by an earth tremor in the Berwyn Mountains with which it has no connection. So they were saying again, these are two things that happened coincidentally on the same night. You've got a meteor burning up in the atmosphere, and also you've got an earth tremor.
So is this incredible coincidence, two separate natural phenomena, a meteor shower and an earthquake happening simultaneously, in itself a complete answer to the mystery? Many UFO believers think not. They believe the files fail to answer the big question, what was the source of light Pat Evans and Hugh Lloyd saw on the ground?
So what Pat saw is an absolute mystery. I don't think it's a UFO for a minute, although it is an unidentified something. It appeared to be on the ground. If anything, it's an unidentified grounded object. But it's a mystery. So in and amongst all the hype about aliens and extraterrestrial crashing, in amongst the truth and the fact about an earthquake and bolide meteors, what we have is a mysterious sighting of a stationary, large, glowing object on the ground for at least 10 minutes.
So is this case closed for Berwyn? There are still many unanswered questions.
The Berman Mountain incident is, I think in many people's minds, it's not case closed. Some people believe that the release of these files is itself disinformation, and that the Ministry of Defence is still covering up some great secret truth about UFOs.
The MOD has agreed to release all the UFO files over time. But will all the secrets be revealed? It seems that the public is not ready to give up believing just yet. For some people, UFOs are with us for a long time to come. Well, until the real ones show up.
Some people suggest that this drip feeding of information to the public about UFOs is